is the fullest expression of bhakti. Where there is the fullest expression of the Godhead, then there's a corresponding expression of bhakti. When we then move to Mathura, let's say, or Dvaraka, then we have an expansion of Krishna, expansion of Balaram, and associates there possess the bhakti that corresponds, right, with Mathura's Krishna, Dwarka's Krishna, on to Vaikuntha, and so on and so forth. So just as Krishna is expanding for such leelas, there is a sense that his associates also expand with him from Braj to participate in other leelas. And there are examples that are pointed out. Madhu Mangal, for example, from a leela point of view, is a student of Narada. From the tattva point of view, which we're talking about now, however, Narada is the expansion of the original Brahman, if you will. Brahman, the farcical Brahman of Braj, appears as Narada for leelas in Mathura and Dwarka and elsewhere. So there are any number of examples. Sridham, who often defeats Krishna in wrestling, principal friend of Krishna, and as a result, Krishna has to carry him on his shoulders, for example, as may be arranged, prior to the match. Whoever loses will have to do such and such. So with regard to carrying the other on the shoulders, it's fairly common. So Krishna often loses to Sridham, but it's thought that in outside of Braj and Dwarka, Sridham appears as Garuda, who's carrying Krishna on his shoulders. So some examples like this have been cited. Rupa Goswami identifies Satyabhama of the Dvaraka-lila and Rukmini with Radha and Chandravali respectively. There, in Braj, of course, Radharani is prominent. Chandravali is secondary, but in Dwarka, Rukmini is prominent and Satyabhama is secondary. And Rukmini is Chandravali's expansion and Satyabhama is Radha's expansion. So, any number of examples like this. And it extends to Ram Leela, of course, as well. So Balaram is there as Lakshman, and so on. So the idea, the principle is such. The details of that, who's who, where, how many expand, and so on and so forth. Well, that would be volumes and volumes, given the unlimited number of cowherd boys, so forth. But typically, kind of very principled, paradigmatic figures. I don't want to say anybody is less in the Leela, but some are newcomers, sadhakas, sadhus, and so forth. Slightly different status than the expansions of Krishna's immediate friends, Dwadasa Gopal or Astasaki, and so on. So some of the latter, these closest Parshada associates of Krishna, their position of their leelas has been mentioned, and it's striking here that how they appear elsewhere, but there's no comprehensive description of all such details. That said, of course, we do have a fairly comprehensive attempt on the part of Kavi Karnapur and later Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in a separate book, attempt on their parts to identify everybody in Krishna Leela who is coming into Gaur. Right, Ganagash Deepika, and I forget Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's book, a century or more later, tries to detail that based on scriptural statements, what devotees have said, their character, and there's room for different opinions there and so forth. But that's a fairly comprehensive attempt to make a similar point. And in one sense, the point is that Krishna is Swayam Bhagavan, but Krishna is not alone. In order for him to be the perfect object of love, there has to be the perfect love that corresponds with it. That is the Achintya Veda Veda. Radha and Krishna are one. You know, you can't have one without the other. You can't have the object of love. It's meaningless if there's no love. And if there's love but there's no object of love, well, then there's no. And that's not complete either. So Krishna's not alone. So he's going to be surrounded by his principal associates wherever he goes, and arguably, as we're saying, in different forms. As far as his pet monkey goes, I never heard anything as to what his appearance is in another lila, but he very well may be there. So those are some thoughts on that. Hope it helps. Another question.
Very much. Your internet is a little weak. Are you on the right?
Oh, I'm on the wrong. Oh, well, it should be. Let's see. For some reason. I'm in the wrong one. I'll change it.
I think Gurmaj froze up. Gurmaj?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, that should work better.
Okay, it's still kind of weak, but it's not too bad, so it should be okay. So the next question is from Doyle Nitai from Bulgaria.
Pranams, Guru Maharaj. I'm asking on behalf of Doyle Nitai because he's not present here today, so I will read it. On the story of Bharata Maharaja and the little deer, Prabhupada comments that due to being overly compassionate to the infant deer, he fell down. But our practice is supposed to soften our heart. An important part of it is Jiva Doya, how to develop right compassion and sensibility.
Okay, this is a story from the 5th canto, where Bharata, who was the emperor of India, gave up his kingdom to live a life of devotion in the forest. And at some point, he saw a fawn trying to, I think, cross the river, and a tiger tried to attack, or a lion, and he managed to save the fawn. And then the fawn became a companion of his, and he became attached to the companion. And in the course of looking for his companion, the fawn who had run away, he met with an accident in his demise, and so he had to take birth as a deer in his next life because he was preoccupied with the deer at the time of death, or special deer. And he could hear and understand the recitation of the Bhagavatam by sages, and he stationed himself nearby and spent his life like that. That's the basic story. What is involved there, in one sense, is well, in a broader sense, it's often the case that someone who, a devotee or a jnani, is not yet fully liberated, may be affected by or watching the sattvic parabdha karma that has not yet been dealt with by bhakti. Gyan cannot deal with the parabdha karma. Bhakti can, but it does so gradually. So compassion for other beings, that is tends to be sattvic in nature. And well, for Gyanis, I'll tell a story by a Gyani. Gyanis can't, as I say, because by Gyan, we cannot do away with parabdha karma. We can do with aparabdha karma. But famous story of Surabi Muni, who was meditating in the Jamuna. He became upset with Garuda, who was eating fish from the Jamuna, and so he cursed Garuda and thought that his curse would keep Garuda from eating the fish. Although Garuda left for other reasons, the parabdha karma of Surabi was his compassion for the fish. Here, this compassion for the fish is material, and we can see that because it got in the way of his respecting a great Vaishnava like Garuda, and he committed an offense to Garuda. And as a result, ultimately, Kaliya, who thought that the Jamuna was now safe from Garuda, the Garuda would never come there because they had some issues between the two of them. Kaliya went and resided in the Jamuna, and all the fish died. So, in this case, the compassion of the Muni was misplaced, and it resulted in Vaishnav aparad. So we have to look at our compassion in light of bhakti and Vaishnavism, and not allow our compassion to be nothing but a manifestation of sattvaguna, if you will, but let it come from the Vaishnava heart and with a proper perspective at the same time, because we can see that in the name of compassion, which could be only a manifestation of the sattvaguna, we could be sentimental, I guess, as you say, was the case for Surabi Muni, and offend the Vaishnava. So it said, Vaishnava Kriyamuta Vignena Bhuja. It's difficult to understand the motive of the Vaishnava, what's behind his or her movements and actions. And we may be sentimental and misconstrue. So that said, it's compassion can also be, rather than just a manifestation of sattvaguna, I guess you could say it can be what's called Sangasiddha Bhakti, that which is by kind of a sangha, by associating with bhakti, it becomes bhakti. It's not inherently bhakti, that compassion, but it becomes bhakti. So that kind of compassion, then it could be expressed in any way towards ordinary people, other living beings, and so on and so forth. But if it is actually Sangasiddha Bhakti, a genuine expression of Jivadaya from within the context of Vaishnavism, then it's not going to get in the way of or come into conflict with what is what is required, or what is necessary, or on our part, or what may be expressed on the part of, let's say, Vaishnava, that may not look like compassion externally. I mean, there are many things that we do just that ordinary people will think is indicative of the fact that we don't have compassion. just living at a monastery, just being a monk, people think is selfish at times because they don't understand the underlying philosophy and so forth. So I've seen it a number of times in the name of kindness to others and other related types of thinking and so on and so forth. It's quite common, even amongst devotees these days, to misunderstand the actions of senior Vaishnavas, even of their guru. So there's the relative and there's the absolute, and the relative has to line up with the absolute. When it's in conflict with the absolute, then we have to take the absolute over the relative. So Jiva Daya, kindness to other living beings, we don't, for example, say, all right, well, in the name of Jiva Daya, let me go and open a hospital and spend, the better part of my time doing that. And that at the cost, let's say, of my spiritual practice or Vaishnav Seva, something to that effect, get carried away by that. There's a place for being kind to others, but as it fits in with the greater good, if you will, that we're involved in as sadhakas. For example, I would see Prabhupada sometimes give to beggars and show compassion to ordinary people, but his primary focus was something else. Sri Maharaj said, why should I go open, a soup kitchen when people are hungry for bhakti directly? I have to feed them. If I sit and talk, people will come and surround me. Why should I give up that to go do something else? So we should do that something else as the opportunity presents itself in relation to a greater and broader and deeper just becoming Krishna conscious is probably the most compassionate thing that you can do, to be kind to others in an absolute sense. So there's the relative and the absolute, and we have to balance the two. So in the context of pursuing our transcendental ideal, the opportunity to show kindness to others will also arise, and we'll express it. But we don't displace the former for the latter in the name of Jiva Daya. So Bhaktivinoda said, Jiva Daya Krishna Nam Sarva Dharma Sar. You want to have the full emphasis on Krishna Nam, also, which is the way, the means, right? What we're doing. And in the context of that serious sadhana, which is a very big, life commitment. It's not just sitting down, even in the Veda chant, which many devotees don't do seriously enough in itself. But beyond that, it's how you conduct yourself throughout the day. So forth. We should sit and chant in such a way that we remember Krishna throughout the day. And we always have our, philosophical perspective and what we're doing in terms of vertical growth in mind. And as I say, in the context of that, that's a full-time engagement. In the context of that, opportunities to show just ordinary compassion will arise, and then that will there. I mean, there's transcendental compassion. Probably give the example: what's the use of saving the dress of a drowning man? So if a person is drowning, you go and save their dress, pull it back, and he drowns, and you bring the dress to the shore, you haven't saved them. He would give that example to illustrate the fact that, well, if we spend our time trying to feed people, we're not going to end hunger. Hmm? Hunger is a problem from identifying with the body mind complex. We should teach people how to overcome that, which will end hunger altogether, right? We don't eat for that, but we only honor prasadam. So we're never hungry. We're hungry to honor prasadam. So he would distinguish in that way between mundane compassion and welfare, and the para-upakara of Mahaprabhu, the transcendental welfare. And that was a strong emphasis of his for good reason. But again, in his own example, he showed that in the context of doing the ultimate good, the para-upakara, if the opportunity arises, to whatever extent it does, to help on it, to also engage in the kind of the shadow of actual compassion, then naturally that's going to be there. If you have a heart for Krishna, you're going to have a heart for others. But if your heart for others takes precedent over your heart for Krishna, which is often see that it does, and it becomes a distortion of the philosophy and the teaching, then that's not what Bhaktivinoda Thakur means by Jivadaya. I see it very common now for devotees to be very, I would say, sentimental in a way that distorts what bhakti really actually constitutes and what needs to be said or done in certain instances to make clear to others what bhakti is and to pursue bhakti oneself. Like I say, I've been criticized just for being a monk, for not being compassionate, not caring about other people. That's kind of a crude example of it, but on many levels it plays itself out. So yeah, the bhakti can look at a glance, and even through the eye of, both eyes staring directly, eyes of Kanishta-adhikaris, bhakti can appear uncompassionate in comparison to many mundane situations where compassion would be applicable. So you have to balance the two. And the way to do that is to have full focus on your sadhana. And it will be very clear to you, obvious opportunities to show kindness to others will be there. As far as Bharata Maharaja to go back to the example, well, it's thought in his case that this was an example of what's called Shobhana karma. So he was in bhava, so he was free from karma. Bhava means to be liberated in this life, even though in that liberated status there's something to do to further progress and attain the perfection of praying, but there's no material influence. So what happened to Bharat? So Shobhana karma means that Shobhana means beautiful, but Krishna arranged this, and for Bharat to act like this, and it sets an example then for others. So we find many examples of Krishna used Parikshit Maharaj in that way. Parikshit Maharaj, he showed that he could fast from food and drink, for days on end and hear the Bhagavatam. So it's why I'm upset that the sage didn't offer him a drink when he was thirsty, to the point that he acted in a way that was unbecoming in relation to the sage, garlanding him with a snake. That's very much out of character. We find only days later he could fast from food, drink, and hear the Bhagavatam. So that's his actual character. So this is an arrangement of Krishna that the Bhagavatam might be recited. Arjuna seems to succumb to material compassion, resist the task at hand. So Krishna arranges this sometimes to his devotees. So Bharata is an example of that. So I hope that that helps. Any further question on that, or I guess the dial's not there.
No, thank you very much. Yeah, you'll hear the answer.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Good question?
Yes, the next question is again from Brighton. It's by Bhakta Crispin.
Okay. Yes.
Haribol
Yeah.
Maharaj.
Hari.
We had a program yesterday, and one of the devotees used an expression. I was going to ask them personally. I'm a keen sea swimmer, and recently the sea's been very choppy, and I've been made painfully aware that it could easily severely humble me if I'm not careful. The question is quite simply about our relationship to Krishna. And the devotee in question, they said, Krishna is our dear friend. And we can read something like this in the Shastra, but I'm very interested in personal revelations as such. So obviously there's the mood of awe and reverence. But there must come a time when, with all of us, we didn't see Krishna as our dear friend, and then we did. So I'm very curious about your own personal revelations, probably.
And what does it have to do with swimming in the choppy ocean?
Well, I mean, a few months ago, it was very hot in Brighton. So I'd go down the sea and I would be diving in, and it would be like my friend. It would be cooling me. And then since recently, it's been very choppy. And I've kind of been very blasé and just wading in anyway. And there have been a few times I'm realizing I could lose my life here. So there are different ways of taking the sea in itself. So likewise with maybe with Lord Krishna, there comes to different degrees and ways which we can know Krishna.
Right. Right. So, for example, it's emphasized that Krishna is the original personality of Godhead, and that is pretty awesome, let's say. We see what that implication of that. Well, so many other forms of Godhead are coming from him, and the whole world, which itself is like awesome. He puts trees inside the seeds. Wow. And so on and so forth, right? So that's pretty awe-inspiring, and I think that there is a strong emphasis to put that in place within Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So from there to, well, Krishna is my friend, that's quite a distance, right?
Sure.
So that's what you're asking about. And you're asking about me personally. But I think before going into that, that Krishna says in the Gita, that in the 10th chapter, he says, what is that verse? Everything comes from me. I'm the source of everything. And one who understands this, Buddha Bhava Samanvita, then they're in a position to worship me with the kind of feeling that would correspond with, for example, thinking of me as a friend. What he's saying there is that I'm the source of it comes from me. I can reciprocate, therefore, in kind, however anyone approaches me, which he also says in the Gita, earlier in the Gita, as people approach me, I reciprocate accordingly. Now, every form of Godhead can't do that. You could approach Narayan like a friend, but he couldn't reciprocate in that way, right? Because of his bhav, his mood, and the devotees that he's surrounded by, who worship him as God. He's four-handed, right? So Krishna being the source of everything, which is very like awe-inspiring, because he is that, therefore he can be your friend, or your lover, or your son. So the two are they go together. So our emphasis on Krishna as the source of all forms of God is very important. Let's look at it in a slightly different way. In Vaikuntha, Narayana is God. So people aren't loving Krishna, Narayana as a friend intimately there. It's Om Narayan, right? So if Krishna is only an expansion of or an incarnation of Narayan, then he doesn't have his own abode. He may appear in this world like other avatars of Narayan, Varaha, Vamana, and so on and so forth. But their abode is Vaikuntha. They live in Vaikuntha, and so all the worship in Vaikuntha is, well, it's not fraternal. It's not fraternal love. It's not romantic love. So if Krishna is only an incarnation of Narayan, then there's no abode in transcendence where we can have a relationship with him like a friend. He would just be a face of Narayan that Narayan shows at times, and then that contracts. And when in Brihad Bhagavatamrita, the book of Sanatana Goswami, when Gopakumar, whose trajectory and destiny is to be a friend of Krishna, he passes through Vaikuntha. Narayan shows him a form of Krishna Lila, and it's charming, but he can't enter into it. Nobody in Vaikuntha can enter into that. They just think, oh, Narayan shows that sometimes and manifests associates to do that, but he's God. So when we emphasize that Krishna is the actual source of Narayan rather than Narayan being the source of Krishna, then we're saying implicitly we're saying there must be an abode that is his abode, where then it's possible to have those relationships, because it's not possible in Vaikuntha. So it's important for us to emphasize, and Krishna does it himself. He says, as I mentioned from the 10th chapter of the Gita, Ham sarvasya prabhavo mata sabram pravartate. He says it two ways. I'm the source of everything. Ham sarvasya prabhavo mata sabram pravartate. Everything comes from me. So he says, Ham sarvasya mata iti matva bhajante mam buddha bhava samandvita. Sridhar Maharaj used to ring it raga bhava samandvita. It means that the emphasis of Gaudiya Vaishnavism is Krishna is the Supreme Personality of God. Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam. This is a cornerstone of the philosophy. Jiva Goswami calls it the password to entering into the proper philosophical understanding of Srimad Bhagavatam. The Paribhas Sutra. So like I said, it's like a password to get in. So it's a very important philosophical point. And at the same time, understanding that point makes it possible for one to interact with him like he's just a friend in due course. So that's a transition, right? At first we understand Krishna as the Supreme Personality of God. But in the context of understanding that, we also understand that he has his own abode, and that there are associates there that relate with him in ways that it would appear that he's not the Supreme Personality of God, which amounts to love being so intense that, so to speak, is pressed by it. Krishna is like, let's say, like a big movie star, right? When movie stars travel in the public, they wear sunglasses. So people can I get your autograph? They just want to be, themselves, and all of this worship and so forth, which they wanted to begin with, at the end kind of gets in the way of their having their own life, so to speak. One of the meanings of Swayam Bhagavan means that, like, Swayam means his own, so he's himself. and he can only be himself people who he can be intimate with, right? So that's a certain measure of love that they possess that's extraordinary. It's not love and reverence, which has a hard time competing with the love of our friends in this world that we have, with the love of our children that we have, with the love of our wife or our lover that we have. It's, you can go to church on Sunday, but it's six days a week. It's, I love my children, I love my parents, my friends, and so on and so forth. So it's a hard time competing. So here's an idea where we can really compete with the love of the friend, love of our parent, love for our parents, love for our partner, and so forth, by making Krishna the focal point of that same type of intensity of love. Of course, you know these things. I'm just reiterating them and emphasizing how the two kind of fit together philosophically. That Krishna is the source of everything, and at the same time, he could be one's friend. So, all of us on the path are like flowers in the garden, and we don't all blossom at the same time, right? Some of us were planted earlier, some were planted later, and so on. So our trajectory will be different. Our adhikar, our eligibility to tread the path, will be different for different devotees, and so forth. So if I tell you about my trajectory, it may not be applicable to yours. I kind of hit the ground running, if you will, in this life. And my life had absolutely no meaning from an academic point of view, from a vocational point of view, from a relationship point of view, until I met Prabhupada. For me, life was practically speaking on hold, and just a complete, I would seem unfit for anything in my own estimation. But I met Prabhupada, and everything came out. So what were my qualities, ability? How could I apply myself, and so forth? And when I met Prabhupada personally the first time, Prabhupada first appeared to me in a dream before I met him personally. And what he did in the dream, that played out later on in wakeful life. But aside from that, when I met him personally for the first time, I didn't know much of the philosophy. I had been reading the Krishna book. I used to read the Krishna book and try to explain it to my friends. When I saw Prabhupada, I wept, and he has one of the most powerful physical feature of Prabhupada was his eyes. He had this benediction glance, if you will, that Baladev Vibhushan writes about. So it was in the airport that I met him, because he was arriving in Los Angeles airport, and he stopped and looked. If he looked at you for 5 seconds, would speak at 10 seconds, it's a long time. 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. 5 seconds. If his glance would hold on you, you have to understand his glance and all of his senses were only focused on serving Krishna. He had a perfected sadhaka deha, practitioner's body, which means his senses were only engaged in relation to objects of the senses for the pleasure of Krishna's senses. So you can imagine what a powerful, if his eye should land on you, right? So for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, that's a long, long time for Prabhupada to be looking at you. And you had to be in a certain space in your heart to be able to keep looking at him if he was looking at you. If you weren't, you couldn't look. You have to look away. So anyway, I was blessed. Prabhupada looked long, and I wasn't counting, but it was a for considerable time. Looked deep at me, and I said, here is a friend coming for me after a long time. We're meeting again. Again, I'm meeting him. And I wept and wept. And these were not ordinary emotional tears and so forth. So that said, I always thought of Prabhupada as my best friend, and I very kind of naturally identified with the cowherd pastimes of Krishna and Balaram, and I knew from Prabhupada, which is what he taught, of course, that the Gopi Bhav is the highest ideal in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And I would preach that whenever the opportunity arose and so forth. But to me, that was just something that, well, that's part of the teaching, but it wasn't how I felt. And I didn't find it to be a conflict or anything, but it just, I naturally and spontaneously simply gravitated towards the cowherd leaders, the pictures of them that the artists were drawing and so forth. And it was just, without thinking about it, well, that to me was where Prabhupada was internally. And of course, later on, I got considerable confirmation of that when I had the opportunity to come under the shelter of Pujapat Sridhar Maharaj, who had memorized Prabhupada's poem on the Jaladut and brought it out, some verses from it one day, and gave a very rasic explanation of it, which just really corresponded with, I think, myself and any number of other devotees who, when there's quite a few of them, who just felt Prabhupada, of course, he was a cowherd boy. That's his, of course, Sridhar Maharaj brought out many examples, where he was born, what family lineage, and the fact that he established Krishna Balaram deities in the center altar in Vrindavana, Govardhana deities, which Bhakti didn't do, so on and so forth. We wrote about this in a book called Oh My Friend. You may have seen it. It's a very beautiful book that just relates all the things we could possibly gather. There's a lot of them that Prabhupada said about his inner life. It's a very strong statement for his conviction. So, I mean, given his own inner absorption and my just like magnetically attracted to him, and obviously I really absorbed myself from the very beginning of my devotional life. I took off, like I said, like I had no meaning, no purpose till I met Prabhupada, and then I had so much purpose, so much energy to spend and so forth, and no time for anything else. I was a little odd in that way, never relaxing, never, so the urgency of Prabhupada was very contagious, and I certainly picked up on that. So I can't think of like a transition that I was thinking of Krishna as the supreme Godhead, and now I'm thinking of as my friend. I always thought of him as a friend, and I kind of thought of that through thinking of Prabhupada, my guru, in that way. So that's maybe the best I can do with it in brief, if that helps. But I think that, for all the devotees, like I began understanding philosophically, the importance of Krishna's Tu Bhagavan Swayam is not that therefore, oh God, we should worship him reverentially. The importance, if we understand it philosophically, oh, therefore it's possible to have a relationship with him as a friend. You understand? That's the implication of it. It seems to be saying, we carefully Gaudiya theology and philosophy, it's saying the opposite to us. Because he is the Supreme Personality of God and all worshipable, then he has the capacity to reciprocate even in this way. Does that help?
Yes, thank you so much, Maharaj.
Okay, thank you for asking. All right. We have a little more time.
Yeah, there's one more question. Seems like the Brighton Sangha is very inquisitive today. So Amrita Gopal, if you think it's not,
I'll have to go there.
Okay.
They have a strong pull on me.
Yes. Hi, Maharaj, wonderful to see you. Why did Krishna speak the karma-mimamsa philosophy in the Govardhana-lila?
Well, he spoke karma-mimamsa philosophy He also spoke Sankhya philosophy. And I believe in the commentaries there, it's been shown that there's a way in which looking at what he says there can be construed to be actually speaking about the virtues of bhakti indirectly. But with regard to karma-mimamsa in particular, one of the features of the karma-mimamsa philosophy is that karma is the determining factor of everything, and therefore the gods are secondary. In other words, Indra is also controlled by karma. So if you do the karma, Indra has to do, right? So why should we worship Indra when Indra is subject to the work, the karma that we do? And our work is taking care of cows, and Govardhana-lila is providing for the cows. So we should do our work. We should worship Govardhana-lila. And why should we give praise to somebody else, like Indra, for that which we're deriving from another, Govardhana? Yeah. And so he's saying ostensibly karma is what rules, or the work. We have prescribed work. We're Vaishyas, we're cow herders. So we should do our prescribed work. Who cares for him, for Indra? And in relation to our work, well, the hill is providing, so we should worship Govardhan. But of course, really, the work here is bhakti, right? Worship of Govardhan is the worship of himself, as he shows later on. So he kind of used the karma-mimamsa to emphasize, kind of be here now, chop wood, you carry water, pay attention where you are, right here, right now. That's the all in all. And by the way, this happens to be Vrindavan. This is my place. So he used it as an argument. It's outside of Vaishnavism, if you will, to dispense with the worship of Indra and convince his father along those lines, given that his father apparently, although he's a Shuddha Vaishnav, apparently is, Varnami. That's the social religious structure within the Lila. So they worship different gods and goddesses and so on and so forth. They're worshiping Indra. So Krishna appealed to him on that basis. But what he's really saying is that we should just, if you look at it carefully, saying we should just do bhakti, we should just do our work, which is the worship of Govardhana-lila. So they were convinced, and then when they worshiped the hill, he showed he was the hill as well. Even as he was standing there worshiping the hill, he showed he was the hill. So something like that. Does that help? Yeah. He did a similar thing with Sankhya. So his main focus there was to dismiss the worship of Indra. He used different mechanisms. What else? Another question for time?
That's it for the questions today. We have a few minutes, but I think that's it.
Okay. Well,
next time.
Something? Follow up? No. Anyway, nice to be with you all, and I hope to be here next Sunday as well. Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai.
Jai. Thank you very much.
Premanandi. Haribo.
Haribo. So I have a quick announcement. Krishna Kanaya would like to organize a Gita reading for the Gita Jayanti. I think was it December 3rd or? Yeah. So December 3rd, if anybody wants to come here on the Zoom and read the Gita with Krishna Kanaya, please, you're welcome. And you can also, if you don't want to read, you can also just come and listen to it. And actually, Krishna Kanaya didn't give any time. What time would it be?
Yeah, Hare Krishna. Nice to see you all. So we did this last year, and I think for the Europeans, it was like in the evening, because maybe some, American devotees would like to join. So also for me, it only works in the evening. I'm in Germany, so that would be maybe 5 p.m. like Central European time. I don't know if some of the Bulgarians would like to join. That would be awesome also. Because it was really nice, it took us like 2.5 hours. So we would just read the verses, so no commentary. And it you can use like Guru Maharaj's translation or from Srila Prabhupada. It's just really about getting this very compact Gita into our ears and our hearts. And
it's a very nice idea. So it looks like December 3rd is a Saturday.
And it's a Ekadashi also.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So that would be 7 a.m. here on the West Coast, and I think 10 a.m. on the East Coast. Okay, sounds great. I hope you guys can attend.
Awesome, cool. Yeah, maybe we can like make a post or something, or just send an email again to confirm the times.
Definitely.
It's still like 4 weeks ahead, so.
Yeah, it's good to get to it early. I can have Sadhvi send something out on the Sri Chaitanya Sangha newsletter.
That would be awesome. Thank you.